And now from Washington, the Inside Scoop. All the news the government does not want you to hear. Now, here's your host on the Inside Scoop, Mark Levine.
Good evening, America. Welcome to Inside Scoop. Today is Debate Monday, as I regularly invite my guest, Republican strategist Mark Levine, on to debate with me the issues of the week. Welcome again, Mike,
Thank
to
you,
the
Mark.
Inside Scoop.
Good to be back. Thanks for inviting me.
Lots of issues to talk about. There is the replacement of Don Rumsfeld with Robert Gates, who is going through his confirmation hearings this week. And of course, there's Rumsfeld's secret memo that just came out in the New York Times this week. Apparently, Rumsfeld agreed with the Democrats to withdraw troops from Iraq. Who knew? Well, I guess we learned that after the election. There is an interesting exchange between our Senator-elect Webb and George Bush about what's going on in Iraq. Interesting cases going up before the United States Supreme Court on school integration. And really, any topic you want to talk about. The toll-free number is 888-488-MARK. 888-488-6275. There's a local number on the screen. We want to hear from you what you want to talk about. Mike, I want to start with this Webb-Bush exchange because I think it's very interesting and I think it's sort of typical of both personalities of both men. I don't have the text in front of me, but the heart of it was that Jim Webb was going to the White House, as all new members of Congress were doing, for a reception for new members of Congress. And apparently, unlike all other members of Congress, Jim Webb didn't want a photo op with the president and decided to hold back. Frankly, after some of the things your party did with photo ops in Maryland, I don't blame him. If you don't know this, they used photo ops to try to pretend that Democrats endorsed the Republicans when they didn't.
Actually, I believe those were just pilfered Webb photos, but that's okay.
But pilfered Webb photo. In any case, Jim Webb said, I'm here to do a job. I'm here to express my point of view. I'm not here for photo ops with the president. The president came over to him anyway and said, in effect, Jim, how's your boy? Jim Webb is the only senator, he's not a senator yet, he will be in a month, but the only senator to have a child serving in the military in Iraq. Jim Webb said, we'd like to get them out of Iraq, to which George Bush responded, that's not what I asked you, how's your boy? To which Jim Webb responded, that's between me and my boy. Now, this has gotten a lot of interesting reaction in the Washington Post. George Will wrote a scathing article saying that Jim Webb was rude to the president. I should have read the exact quote, because actually he said, that's between me and my boy, Mr. President. And he said, we want to get them out of Iraq, Mr. President, which George Will didn't include. When I read that piece, I was very proud of my senator because it showed to me a senator that understood he has a separate constitutional responsibility from the President of the United States. He wasn't going to simply be there to make small talk. He said, we want to get them out of Iraq. And I wasn't too pleased with the president that says, how's your boy? I don't know, maybe if he said, how's your son, I could have handled it a little bit better. But I appreciated that exchange. What were your thoughts?
Well, Mark, one of your problems is you've never lived in Texas. That's a perfectly fine way of saying how's your son in Texas. How's your boy doing, Senator Webb or Senator-elect Webb, or even Jim? I'm sure he called him something like that upon occasion. I think Senator Webb stepped off on the wrong foot here. You won't be surprised to hear me say that. This was a social White House reception. It's a nicety, get to know you, photo op kind of thing for new members of Congress. And for Senator Webb to come in, avoid the receiving line, avoid the photo op, and then pick a fight with the president by trying to introduce sort of a snippy response to his really question about, how is your boy doing over there? I'm the commander-in-chief. I'm worried about all the troops. How's he doing? And the senator decides he's going to pick a fight over it. Not off to a good start.
What was he supposed to say? My son is in Iraq. We'd like to get him home. That's what he said, in effect. And then the president says, that's not what I asked you.
Right.
All right? That's not what I asked you. How's your boy? What do you want to say? He's fine and dandy. He's avoiding bombs. Yeah, he was almost killed the other day. He has no body armor, Mr. President. But, hey, we're just trying to get him home. Oh, you told me not to mention that. I mean, what was he supposed to say?
Except for the fact that Jim Webb's son does have body armor, and he's doing quite well over there.
I'm glad he does. Some of our troops don't.
No, they all have them now. In fact, there's not one over there that doesn't have the equipment they need today. Now,
I'm not so sure that's true, but maybe one of our callers will let us know.
I believe the proper answer to that is, the commander-in-chief was inquiring about the status of the troops. When I was in the military, you were always asking about your men. How are they doing? What's going on? How are you today? How's your family? That's the way we were taught to be leaders and officers, was to find out how the troops were doing. I think that's what the commander-in-chief was doing, and I think the senator established himself as a guy who is not really going to get along with people, and if you don't get along with people, I'm not saying it's the old go along along to get along that Tip O'Neill or Sam Rayburn talked about. I'm talking about if you can't get along with people, your own colleagues, don't play well with other children, you're not going to be an effective senator.
Mike, you've been in the military. You know the peer pressure in the military. You know there is tremendous pressure from your peers and from your command not to say or do anything that is in any way derogatory. You could go out set off a cliff, and you're supposed to just fall off the cliff and not complain about it. If Jim Webb had said, my son doesn't like the conditions in Iraq, okay? Headlines. He has immediately morale problems in his unit. He can't serve with his people. They're going to say, you know, we don't trust you now, and we can't serve with you. If he had said things are fine and dandy when they're not fine and dandy, then the president would say, even Jim Webb's son never said everything's just fine. The president tried to put Jim Webb in a catch-22, where either his son would have tremendous problems, he'd be seen as, oh, his son can't play with the program, or he's a complainer, or he said everything's fine when it's not. Jim Webb said the right thing. He said, that's between me and my son. It shouldn't be national headlines how Jim Webb's son is in Iraq. It's not good for his son, and it's certainly not good for Jim Webb.
Okay, then that's exactly my question. Why did Jim Webb leak this to the press? You look at the full story, and it's not just that the president.
There were a dozen people that said it happened. According to the Washington Post, there were a dozen people that saw this.
But the original source was Jim Webb, because
I don't know about that.
Well, you read between the lines. The president says, "How's your son?" You know, I want to get him home. Okay, that's not what I asked you. How is your son? Well, that's between me and my boy. Well,
Mr.
President. But then the next paragraph of the article said that Webb was so incensed that the president would ask that he wanted to punch the president out right then and there.
But he didn't.
Well, he didn't. But
there's a great website, folks. If you want to punch Bush out, I have it on my program. You can do that because people get angry, but they don't actually punch.
Who else but Jim Webb knew that he wanted to punch the president out right then and there? So obviously it was a Webb.
He could have told an aide who told it to the Washington Post.
That's still, you know, whether it was Jim Webb or Jim Webb aide, it's not, you know.
This is the kind of arrogant president that we have. You know, it's like, how's your boy? That's not what I asked you. To me, I saw the president dressing down a duly elected United States senator like he was a staffer. I'm sure the president does this to his staffers. That's not what I asked you, boy. You tell me what I asked you. But to address a duly elected senator that way, instead of saying, okay, you know, when he says, I'd like to get them out of Iraq, that was a great segue to work together to say, well, you know, here's what we're doing. You know, really open the question, do something that would help all Americans, all Virginians who care about ending this war in a way that kills as few people as possible.
I'm going to give you one, I'm going to take one. You say the president may have said, that's not what I asked you. In fact, the president say, hey, Jim, that's not what I asked you. I'm wondering how he's doing, you know? I mean, what's going on over there?
That wasn't the quote in the paper, and there were a dozen people who heard it.
We don't know the tone of voice, but it could have been that tone of voice. Hey, Jim, that's not what I asked you. How is he doing? How's your boy doing?
Somehow I don't think so.
Second thing, I don't know that it's not the case.
You nor I were there, but a dozen people in the Washington Post. I think I would have seen a different account if that's the way it happened.
Had I been able to give the president a script that night and tell him what to say under those circumstances, I would have told him to say, Senator, you know, I'm looking forward to the day when we can bring them all home safely, too. Look forward to working with you on that one.
And walk away.
No, still get to know the guy. Ask him if he wants the photo op.
Let me raise another issue with you. We have Robert Gates, who is up to be replacing Don
Secretary Rumsfeld.
Now, I'd be the first to say that any replacement for Don Rumsfeld has to be good. If we had to put a chimp in there, I'd probably confirm the chimp. But, be that as it may.
Even a Republican chimp.
Well, yeah, even a Republican chimp has got to do a better job than Don Rumsfeld.
Gracious, Mark, gracious.
You know, at least less people would die.
But we have Gates.
So I will admit, from the outset, I like Gates better than Rumsfeld by that prior definition. But Robert Gates, as it came out in his CIA hearings years ago, just came out in today's Washington Post, that at that time, he was accused of fixing the intelligence around the policy. He was accused of not saying the facts to his commander, to the President of the United States, but instead telling the President what he wants to hear. Don't give me no bad news, man. Now, we've seen a lot of this in this White House. We've seen Curveball, the guy in Germany who everyone said couldn't be believed. They was warned to Tenet, and Tenet put him forward and made Colin Powell tell a bunch of lies to the United Nations. We've seen the Downing Street memo. The Bush is determined to fix the facts around the intelligence, around the policy, fix the intelligence around the policy. We even saw Richard Clark say the president asked him 3 times, prove to me Saddam Hussein caused 9/11, and 3 times he had to tell the president, that's just not how it happened. Richard Clark, unlike the others, did not create something false because the president wanted to hear it. Here's my question for you. It seems to me we see a pattern here. This is a president who doesn't want to know the truth, doesn't want to know what's going on, doesn't want to use our expensive satellites all around the globe. He wants people to tell him what he wants to hear, and it looks like with Gates, we're getting the exact same thing.
Well, you know, the president makes these appointments with the advice and consent of the Senate. The Republicans do maintain a control of the Senate now, but that will change come January, as we all know, as the audience knows. The key thing, though, is that it's up to the Senate to decide whether or not Mr. Gates is the right guy to replace Donald Rumsfeld as the Secretary of Defense. The way the hearings are going, there's going to be questions. Things from Gates' past. Remember, he was nominated for CIA, and that nomination was withdrawn. He did not serve as director of the CIA.
Partly because of this past.
For whatever reasons, the Senate is on record with Gates as doing their due diligence and finding out whether this guy is qualified to serve in the job for which he has been nominated. So we will see now, as the hearings progress, as to whether or not he will pass Senate muster and whether or not he will be confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense. I suspect that come the end of next week, or even the end of this week, you're going to find an overwhelming bipartisan vote on behalf of the Senate that confirms Gates as Secretary of Defense.
I agree. Gates will be confirmed for the reasons I said earlier, because people would rather have a chimp in office than Don Rumsfeld.
Well,
but that's not my point. My point is not to criticize the Senate. I am not criticizing Republicans or Democrats in the Senate. Like I said, anyone I think is an improvement over Don Rumsfeld. To me, the question is, why is the president continuing to hire yes men, continuing to hire people who, instead of taking the intelligence as it is, the facts on the ground as it is, as ugly as it is, the situation in Iraq, telling the president the truth and letting the president decide based on that truth? Why does the president insist on having people, whether it's Tenet, or he tried to do it with Richard Clark to his credit refused, or Curveball? Why does the president insist on having yes men instead of people who will tell him the truth?
Well, first of all, Curveball didn't work for the president. He was a guy, you know, over in Germany. In Germany. But let's talk George Tenet. George Tenet was a holdover. George Tenet was appointed by Bill Clinton
to be. He was a yes man to Bill Clinton as well.
But
I think we would learn the mistakes by now.
Well, he's no longer in the position. Now we have in fact, we have a whole new intelligence apparatus now.
What does it matter? We have an apparatus, but the president doesn't want them to tell him the truth. He wants them to tell him things that fit the policy. That's what the Downing Street memo told us.
I think the president gets a fairly good briefing every morning now that tells him the way the world is, et cetera. But your real question is on Gates. Gates is not going to be a yes man. Well, we'll find out.
My real question's on the president, honestly. It's not about Gates. To me, it's a broader question than Gates. I think, again, Downing Street memo. There's a case right here in today's Washington Post, yesterday's, actually Sunday, about a friendly fire case. And I don't think it's that important, except I think it illustrates a problem. This is a young man in Iraq. Last name, I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's Bourade. I hope I haven't done that wrong. Peggy Bourade of Canton, Ohio. They just found out that apparently their son was killed by Polish troops accidentally in friendly fire in 2004. Now, that's a fact. It's not pleasant. I'm sure it wasn't intentional. But they didn't tell this family the real reason that their son, Jesse Burrage, died, because they didn't want to offend the Polish troops. So they lied to this family because, again, they're trying to fix the facts around their policy. Why can't we have a president who simply says, I want the truth out, the buck stops here, whatever happens, happens, I want to let you know? Why don't we have that kind of president?
Well, I'm not familiar with that particular case, Mark, and I can't comment on it other than it's my position that the family should always know the circumstances surrounding the death of their loved ones, particularly in a situation like this. Now, there may be a time, this doesn't look like it, but we don't know. There may be a time when perhaps, you know, your son is or daughter is an operative with the CIA or something like that, and you're never going to find out what the real facts are around them.
That's different. To me, I just see a very clear pattern. Downing Street memo, the accepting curveballs, talking about mobile weapons labs, that I think Colin Powell will, to his grave, regret that he was tricked that way. Tenet, we just see Robert Gates, this is a president, doesn't want to know the truth. He wants you to tell him what he wants to hear. And I think, unfortunately, we're seeing the same thing with Robert Gates.
Well, I disagree, and I think the evidence is that probably 80% of the Senate Democrats are going to vote to confirm Robert Gates. And if they think they'd rather have a chimp than or whatever.
The president maybe needs to nominate a chimp.
If they'd rather have a chimp than Secretary Rumsfeld, Secretary Rumsfeld's already announced he's gone.
No, but the problem is Rumsfeld stays until you get a replacement, and none of us want him there.
You vote no on Gates, and you'll have another nominee within 24 hours. You'll have another. In fact, the president doesn't even want to lose this one. You signal that you're going to oppose Gates, and that one will be withdrawn, and there'll be another one comes up.
Toll-free number, 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. We want to hear from you. We'll be right back after this.
Mr. DeBruzzo, I'm Ed McMahon, and we're signing up people for...
Yes,
I am. Yeah. Mr. Murphy, Ed McMahon. We're starting up... No.
Dreams really do come true.
Hombre, dinero.
No.
Con cámaras.
Yes, Ed
con
McMahon,
cámaras.
see.
Ed McMahon.
Yes, Ed McMahon. We're having our first
Ed
ever...
McMahon.
Yes. Tuesday night at the high school. We're starting up the neighborhood watch in this area, and here's all the information.
Stevie, get down here, please.
No, it's just
5, 6, 7, 8.
No tango dinero. Neighborhood watch. We're having this neighborhood watch, the first one. Right.
Larry, put some pants on.
I'll come back.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Start a neighborhood watch. It's just one of the many ways you can help make America stronger. To find out how, call or log on for this free guide.
When I was young, my dad always told me to dream big and dream often.
My mom and dad were always my biggest cheerleaders.
I've been very fortunate to have parents that care, but some kids aren't so lucky.
That's why the Major League Baseball players trust for children.
Same with Volunteers of America, to help kids everywhere.
For more than 100 years, Volunteers of America has helped children, families, and many others rebuild their lives.
Our Share with a Child partnership wants you to give kids your time, guidance, and support.
Let's work together to give every child a chance. Find out how you can help a child dream big. Call 1-800-899-0089 or visit volunteersofamerica.org.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. A lot of you have commented on the blog at radioinsidescoop.com. We like that. A smattering of comments about Webb and Bush, some taking up for each side, but most not liking the term, how's your boy? They think, how's your son, is a little more dignified.
They've just never been to Texas.
You know, we'll move on.
I lived a year in Texas.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry. I hear Austin's nice, but I don't know about the rest of the state.
When you're driving along the highway at about 130 miles in Texas and you get pulled over by the trooper and he comes up and says, how are you doing, boy? He doesn't mean anything about it. He's just, ready to see your driver's license.
They say the only thing in the middle of the road in Texas are, the dead armadillos. Everyone's to the far right. I want to talk about a case that I believe oral argument is today before the United States Supreme Court, and it's a case that some would argue is really an attack on Brown versus Board of Education. Here are the facts. There's two school systems, one in Louisville and one in Seattle. And what they do is let's just read. In Louisville, schools are based, the students are assigned to schools based on where they live. And so they're grouped in clusters. After being assigned to a school in their neighborhood, a student can request a transfer. And they will look at transfers and grant them unless it would make the school body have a black student population of less than 15% or more than 50%. Now this is a school district that's about 1/3 black. The Seattle plan allows people to choose any 3 of Seattle's 10 high schools. They rank them in order of preference. First preference for tiebreakers, if more students want a school than can get it. First preference is for siblings attending a chosen school. Second preference is how close you are to the school, unless it would change the racial makeup from the district average by more than 15%. This is a 60% non-white school district. Now, as I'm sure you know, Mike, from Brown versus Board of Education till about 1980, schools in America became increasingly desegregated until about 60% of all African Americans attended schools that were not majority African American. The trend has been in the reverse, and today more than 70% of all black students in the United States attend schools that are majority African American. And the problem with this is that not only does it not have the diversity that I think is very good in America, I think you can't really learn unless you are with people of different races, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic levels. But to me, the real problem is it goes to the old separate and unequal problem of Brown versus Board of Education. George Will wrote an article that, to me, typified the whole thing and really made it clear on why I so much agree with Louisville and Seattle and disagree with the conservatives. George Will begins his article, which I have here somewhere. He says, this kid cannot go to this inferior school, is being forced to go to this inferior school because he's white. This kid is forced to go to this inferior school because he's white. Mm-hmm. And I looked at that and I said, now wait a minute. What about all the black kids at that inferior school? Why do we have an inferior school at all? Why are you complaining that a white kid has to go to inferior school when all these black kids are at that inferior school already? Why do we have inferior schools? And let me suggest to you one of the reasons we do is because a lot of white people don't care about how blacks are educated, and they live in areas, many of them, where the property taxes are low, and so they get worse schools. And sometimes the only way you can improve schools with a large African-American majority is to stick a lot of white kids in, because suddenly the government will look and care. And that's why I firmly support these voluntary plans, and I hope the Supreme Court finds them constitutional.
Well, what's not accurate about what you just said, Mark, is that it's not a voluntary plan. As you described it, yes, people have the option of moving here and moving there, unless it
changes the racial balance.
Unless it changes the racial balance,
That's right.
In which case, then you're mandatory stuck where you are. You don't have the opportunity to do it.
That's right.
I was fortunate enough that I heard an extended radio program on this very topic while I was stuck in traffic coming out here to the studio tonight, so I have some up-to-date information. Yes, there was oral arguments on it. These are very similar to a case that was decided 2 years ago when Sandra Day O'Connor was on the Supreme Court.
The Michigan case.
The Michigan case. She was the swing vote on that one, and she sided with the liberal side of the court, and the Michigan case, was in place. Now Sandra Day O'Connor has left. Justice Alito has joined the court, and it looks, according to what I heard today, that Justice Alito is probably going to go the other way on this. So the question becomes, where is Justice Kennedy on this? Because he's the other alleged, he's the swing vote of the day, flavor of the day.
We have 4 far right-wing conservatives,
we have,
and then we have one that's sort of just a conservative, and then 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats.
We have 4 defenders of the Constitution, and then we have people like Stephen Breyer, who was quoted today as saying, well, you know, the text of the Constitution is not always helpful in determining what we should do here. This is a quote from Justice Breyer today. Perhaps taken out of context. I just heard that particular soundbite on the radio. But it astounds me that a Supreme Court justice would say that. What the Supreme Court is apparently going to do, and we'll always be surprised as to what, they are going to say that there is no justification for assigning people here and there based on race. That having neighborhood schools is a perfectly valid thing, and people have the right to go to their neighborhood schools, and you can't send them someplace else just because you're trying to achieve a certain racial mix. Now, what the court is probably going to say is that you can voluntarily do it, as you said. You can take a magnet school, you can create a magnet school and put it in an area that doesn't have a lot of racial majority people, a lot of white kids in it, and you can try and attract those white kids into that minority neighborhood with a lot of minority students with a good magnet school, a top-notch magnet school, something that's going to give them a perfect, above average, excellent education. That's what the court's going to come out and say has to be the remedy, not arbitrarily telling kids they have to go to a certain school because if they don't, it's going to screw up the racial numbers.
It astounds me that the drafters of the 14th Amendment, the radical Republicans who freed the slaves, and that you think that they would want a racially segregated society.
We don't want a racially segregated society.
But we have one. We have one because of living patterns. You know it, I know it. Let's just face the facts. Let's not pretend it's not the case. And we have, in poor areas, overwhelmingly blacks live in poor areas. Not exclusively, of course, but far greater than percentages. And because they have less property taxes, you end up in a case where if you're poor and you're black, you don't get as good an education as if you're rich and white. And whatever you think of parents' choices, it's not a 10-year-old's fault that he is or she is born poor and black. So part of what these plans do is they try to say, hey, we in America care about all our kids, not just the rich white ones. And so, I mean, look at the Louisville plan. The Louisville plan assigns kids based on where they live, all right? You can't have any problem with that. But it says if you want to transfer to a different place, They want to make sure the black student population is no less than 15 and no greater than 50% in a district that's 1/3 black. What's wrong with that?
Why are we manufacturing racial percentages and things? Why can't we just say every school is going to meet certain standards, and those standards are not going to be minimally acceptable standards. They're going to be standards of excellence, and hold that school district accountable for making sure that they have a program of excellence in that school, so that every kid, not regardless of race, but regardless of where they go to school, they get an excellent education. That's what Republicans want to do, Mark.
Because, Mike, we live in the real world. We live in a world where race shouldn't matter, but it does, where it has mattered for hundreds of years, where it continues to matter. There was an interesting article in New Republic interesting political science article I read just the other day that says if you control for racist attitudes in the South, there's no difference between the South and the North in terms of supporting Democrats and Republicans. It's entirely based on racial animus. The reason why your party is pretty much confined to the South these days.
Well, that's the kind of trash I'd expect to read in the New Republic. Come on, cite a magazine of some repute, please.
It's a study. But the point is, race does matter, and it seems to me unfortunate but true, and you can disagree, and our callers, folks, if you disagree, call in and let me know. It's unfortunately true that, and it's not just racial, it's also social economic, but people who are wealthy, white, upper middle income people, they care about their kids as they should, but they don't focus on other kids that aren't making it. Here are the kids with all the advantages anyway. Here are the kids that before they take SATs have Stanley Kaplan courses. These are the kids whose parents give over and above additional money to the public schools, while a different Gates, Bill Gates of Microsoft, has to give billions of dollars to public schools in inner cities because they don't have the money. We are living in a country that is separate and unequal. You know, Brown was supposed to stop that. This is a small way to help fix it.
It's more than money. If you take a look at school districts nationwide, the most funded per student school district in the country is the District of Columbia. They spend more money per student in the District of Columbia, comfortably over $20,000. I think it's $22,000, $23,000 per student per year now, in excess of New York, Los Angeles, wherever. And no one, I don't think, would make an argument that D.C. schools are not in the bottom 1% of the country. I mean, they are atrocious. They're awful. You cannot get an education there. Now, so clearly,
depends on where you are in D.C. There are some good public schools in the Northwest, right? I mean, in the white areas, there's some decent public schools.
Typically not. Typically not.
And to me, it's broader than D.C., though. It's still separate and unequal.
Why do you think there are so many good private schools in D.C.? You know, the people that can afford it, they send their kids to private school because the D.C. schools are awful.
I think that integration is a good in and of itself, that Americans should go to school with other Americans and shouldn't live in these, enclaves where everyone has the same religion and everyone has the same race and everyone has a social economic status. To me, that's just not the way the real world is. That's not the way America is. And it leads to, I think, more racial identity and more racism than allowing people to realize that people of different colors and races and socioeconomic classes are good and bad just like anybody else.
Well, I think integration is a wonderful thing. I certainly hope and pray that, there comes a time when we're all living together, playing together, going to school together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But having the government force us to do it for no demonstrable reason of success. Mark, we've had this for 45 years now, and we don't seem to have a track record of success with it.
It worked well until 1980, and now it's going in the wrong direction.
Well, I don't know that it ever worked.
To me,
really.
For your party, it's hopes and prayers. For my party, it's action. 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. You want to comment on this or anything else going on this week? Let me know. We want to hear from you. We'll be right back after this.
On the floor. I was a cowboy. Bang, 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 bang. I said, Jenny, wake up, it's just pretend. But she wouldn't wake up. If you give me a fish.
If you give someone a fish,
you feed them for a day.
Teach someone to fish.
You feed them for a lifetime.
Give me a fish, and you'll feed me for a day. Teach me to fish, and you'll feed me for a lifetime.
Through Volunteers of America, you can help change lives in your community.
Mr. Studied algebra in school and got a better job than I could. You take the last couple.
Oh, no, Mr. Stuck in an entry-level job because you only learned basic math. I don't have a boss riding my butt like you do, so you take it so you can get back to your desk.
You know, I probably should, but maybe Miss AP Calculus with the $200 haircut in the big office upstairs would like a cup.
Oh, no, Mr. What was your name again? Never mind, it doesn't matter. I'm too busy doing important things to care. I just came down for some sweet and start.
You know, if my limited math abilities weren't keeping me from getting a better job, I'd quit this afternoon.
I don't blame you. But thank goodness you're stuck here because we really need someone to make the coffee.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. During the break, Mike Lane and I were talking about why we do have inferior schools in America. And I would suggest to you that one of the reasons we have them is because it's socioeconomic. When you've got poor families who are struggling, and let's face it, the economy is horrible if you're in the middle class or the lower middle class in America. Yes, if you're in the super 1%, you're doing great under George Bush, but for the rest of us, it's getting worse and worse. Parents have to work 2 and 3 jobs. They can't concentrate on the schools, and I think it's wrong. I think they should, in addition to working their 16-hour days in the factory and paying heavy income taxes while Paris Hilton gets lots of tax breaks. I understand that Bush is trying to punish poor people. I get that.
So I just got you on record for an income tax reduction.
For poor people. For poor people.
For everyone.
Well, one of the ways you can do it, for example, is by simply saying that people who don't work, people who earn capital gains, dividend, interest, estate taxes, that they have to pay their fair share. All you have to do is do that, and suddenly we can get less income tax. One thing I like is we talked about last week, Al Gore's plan. Abolish the payroll tax, replace with the carbon tax. But my point on the schools
probably
is this.
a very regressive tax when it comes right down to it. But
nah, we impose a lot of it on Exxon. Don't worry. But
what about the poor truck driver?
Poor people are working hard, and they don't have as much time to be involved with their kids' schools. One of the wonderful things about integrating schools by race, by socioeconomic class as well, is that, let's face it, every teacher will tell you the kids that are better in school help the kids that are less good in school. That's just kind of the way it works. And if you have a system where all the kids that have the concerned parents, and again, it's not the kids' fault. You can blame the parents all you want. It's not the kids' fault whether parents care about the schools or don't care about the schools. You have all the concerned parents, everyone, they send their kids to the best schools, and these children are indeed being left behind. You were telling me in the break about in Arlington, the kids in South Arlington are left behind while the kids in North Arlington get a decent education. It seems to me the only way is to mix it up and to put some of the kids that are having trouble in with the kids that are doing good. And frankly, talk about the soft bigotry of low expectations. If you give the kids who are running behind higher expectations, I think they'll do better.
Well, I agree. Challenging the kids, creating an environment in the school that leads them to believe that they have confidence in themselves, that they can achieve, that they have a future, and inspires them to do so is the best thing we can do. But I think you do that with good, credible teachers. I think you do it with motivating teachers. I think you do it with highly qualified and trained teachers. And I think you do it with a principal who has a vision for that school and parents who are involved in that school and want to make it happen. I don't think you do it by busing kids across the county and making them attend school just based on a racial quota.
I think you do it by mixing up the student body. I think it's important. Students learn as much from each other as they do from teachers in schools, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Let's leave the locker room out of this, Mark.
No, they do. I mean, in college, I'm sure I learned more from my fellow students than I did from my professors. And part of the way you learn is if you have students that are motivated next to students that are not motivated, that helps motivate those students. If you have all unmotivated students, they're not going to go anywhere no matter how many good teachers you have. Let me go to the phones, though. Baptiste from Alexandria, welcome to the Inside Scoop.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
I have a comment and a question for the gentleman on the guest you have right there. How you doing?
Baptiste, thank you for calling in.
I have one comment, and my question goes to you. My comment first is that first we have to deal with the reality that where we are right now in terms of the school system. I have personally a number of family members who work in the school system. And I come from, my mother's a teacher, my girlfriend's a teacher, I have 3 aunts who are teachers, all of them work for state schools in New York, Maryland as well as Philly. And my mother's from the Caribbean, and I have a different view on education altogether. But in terms of the way the school system is right now, we have some schools that don't even have books. We have some schools in which we have undergraduate students who are filling in as substitute teachers because nobody wants to go to these inner city schools. We have students who go to school whose parents are too busy to make sure they even go to school. These inner city schools are not the standard model mommy and daddy need to send their kids to school and be more active in their school. Majority of these students only have the school as a means of a way out, but there's no other beacon in their society. Now, after making that statement, now let's go to the question. School districts receive money and funding based on the taxes of that particular area or that particular
Property
region.
taxes, right?
Right, property taxes, exactly. Now, if a school is penalized by taking away funding based on performance and scores, you take away money based on a standard scoring of students not performing, and then you take away more money again when you don't have qualified teachers, what do? That's the question I have for the gentleman of the panel. Also, and if you don't want to divide the schools, or don't want to have students being transferred based on a racial divide or based on racial limiting, what do you have in mind to allow these students to go to better schools?
Baptiste, just before Mike answers, I think you put that out beautifully. I couldn't agree with you more. You put it better, actually, than I have. Mike, he asked you some tough questions. I mean, what about the reality situation? We have these awful schools. They're inner city schools. People aren't helping these kids. What are we going to do?
All right. First of all, Baptiste, to your statement before we get to your question, and that is there is absolutely no excuse anywhere acceptable, justifiable, or anything for schools where students don't have textbooks, okay? You know, back to basics. Let's make sure that we have a teacher in every classroom, that we have, you know, the textbooks for the kids, and we're starting and keeping and maintaining the proper atmosphere in the school so that everybody can learn. I just, you know, I can't fathom any school district that would do that. Not acceptable. Now, on to your question. What's my response as to how we improve these schools? You hold them accountable, Baptiste. You tell these schools, and this is essentially what No Child Left Behind did back when it was passed. It said, okay, we have a baseline. We're measuring where you are now, and we realize that there are some schools that are not going to be up to the level of standard that we're looking for. So, okay, if you don't pass it the first year, then we expect to see some improvement in the second year. And there has to be a certain measurable amount of improvement. And if we don't see that after the second year, then we want to see it in the third year, and we want to see improvement until you get to that point. When you fail to improve, when the school district fails to even make an effort to improve to give these kids education, then the only thing you can do is give the kids an option to go to a different school. And that's what No Child Left Behind does. If it 3 years in a row fails to meet the federal standards, and I'm really a fan of state standards, not federal standards, but if it fails to meet the standards that have been set by No Child Left Behind, then those students have the option at the school district's expense to get on a bus and go to another school in that district that provides a much better education for them.
You know, Mike, that's all good in theory. It completely fails in practice, and I think you know it. And the reason is because they have it backwards. If you have a poor performing school, and it's usually a poor performing school because, as the caller pointed out, the property taxes in poor schools, you just don't have the money. You have property taxes in rich areas, and particularly in places like New York and other major cities. Chicago's a good example. If the school's poor performing, they can't hire good teachers. And frankly, you need more teachers to deal with some of the inner city pathology of higher quality than perhaps you do with a school where their parents are also training the kids as well. They probably need more money. But in any case, they have less. Sometimes they don't have books. And what are you going to do to punish them? You're going to take money away from them.
No,
you're going to take a school that needs more help than any other school, and you're going to make it worse for those very kids.
No, I'm going to let those kids go to a school that will perform. I'm going to let them, instead of being trapped in their school that doesn't care about them, I'm going to let them go to another school.
You're going to bus the black kids to the white areas. Let's be very truthful about what we're saying.
At their choice, they can go to any school they want to in that district that's performing, whether it's a black school, a white school, or anything else.
Here's another idea. If you have a racial mix, if you have a socioeconomic mix, if you have kids who are motivated along with, it's really the parents, kids with motivated parents, mixed with kids with non-motivated parents, or frankly parents who are working to the bone just trying to stay afloat and keep a home in this economy and don't have time to worry about their kids' school, if it's all mixed up together, the parents will insist on the better schools. The parents will say, this teacher is awful. If we mix up the kids in America and treat the rich kids with the poor kids, educate them all together, then you know what? The system will work in itself. But the way it works is the Republicans say, we want everyone to have greater schools, and we're going to work to make the white schools great. The black schools, they'll all fail, and we'll bust the kids, the white areas. But there's no room. Even Seattle says there's no room.
No, we don't want the black schools to fail. We want the black schools to perform at the same level. In fact,
but they don't.
In fact, it's not black schools. It's not a racial minority school.
But it is.
We want the schools that are not performing, no matter who the students are, to improve their performance so that the kids can get a decent education. And it doesn't matter who goes there.
That is a great idea. Too bad it doesn't happen in practice. It's just not the same. You can go to Los Angeles and go to Beverly Hills School, and you will find, I'm sure, one of the best public schools in the nation, where less than an hour away is Watts.
I don't know. I saw that on TV last decade. That didn't strike me as a good school.
I don't think 90210 is accurate. The same is true of Chicago. New Trier in the north, one of the best public schools in the nation, and they've got South Side schools. They're some of the worst. New York City, some of the best schools. I think, I forget which ones. School of Science is one of the best, and then some of the worst.
What about the examples of teachers and principals and students, schools that have been able to motivate students to achieve and do their best?
They're wonderful. They need to be rewarded.
We had a whole movie about a guy named Jimmy Escalante, who in Watts, L.A., in a place where nobody was expected to do anything other than maybe show up half the time.
Those are terrific.
He had motivation.
Yes,
he had high expectations of the kids. He convinced them that they had a future, and it worked.
And you know
so much so that we made a movie out of it.
You know what the problem is? There are very few people like that on this planet. Most people, I graduated college. I could have been a teacher. Some say I would have been a good teacher. I went to law school. Why did I go to law school? Because our society rewards lawyers much better than teachers. I'll be the first to tell you, bad idea, and I'm a lawyer. Back in the 1940s, interesting statistic, the average teacher made more money than the average college graduate. Today, the average college graduate makes twice the wages of the average teacher. In Europe, and I lived in Switzerland for a year, teachers are respected, they're paid well, they get the equivalent of what would be about $75,000 in the United States. We pay our teachers half that amount. It's no wonder we have awful, illiterate teachers. We can't find enough teachers. We have to drag people, like this Baptiste mentions. We have undergraduate students because we can't find teachers because we just don't pay them enough. If we pay them more, we get better teachers, better schools.
You know what? Again, it's not just the money. I'm sure we have some rural areas where the cost of living is low, where teachers don't get paid that much. I mean, I know those places exist, but if you're talking about the highly urbanized areas where schools are failing, those teachers are getting paid a fortune. Again, we'll go to D.C. D.C. teachers are among the highest paid in the country.
D.C. has its own pathologies. Okay, I'll be willing to accept that right from the outset, that the District of Columbia has its own pathologies.
New York City school teachers get paid among the highest in the country. They are getting a fortune. And, they start at $50,000 a year. Just right out of school, a kid gets $50,000 a year to walk into a classroom for 10 months worth of work. Hardly anybody walks into the private sector at that rate.
Teachers are still being paid half what a college graduate is. And I think that if we would treat teachers with more respect and encourage more people to become teachers, we wouldn't have, look, a lot of teachers, let's face it, don't want to work in inner city schools. They don't want to work there. They just refuse. They only want to work in areas where the kids are already, have had a good educational background. I mean, I worked in inner city school for about 3 months. I'm no expert, but I worked for 3 months in New Haven, Connecticut, an inner city school. It was about 98% black, 2% Latino. In that school, 9th graders were barely functionally literate, and I'm not even sure about that. They couldn't complete a sentence on a paper. It wasn't my fault. They came in 9th grade, but I tell you this, their teacher, and I replaced him for 2 days a week, their teacher was misspelling words on the board. Their teacher was in the back of the room and basically having them read from the textbook. And if they misunderstood a word, they just skipped it, and he didn't care. Well, the teacher at that time, in the early 90s, was paid $19,000 a year.
Incompetent teachers are not acceptable.
I agree.
That person should be gone.
But if you don't pay them enough, you can't get the competent teachers you need. It's my bottom line.
Well,
capitalism, free market. Pay better, you get better quality.
I certainly agree that no teacher should be making $19,000 a year, and today, even 10 years ago, no teacher should have been making $19,000 a year. That's way too low. I can't fathom that anybody was actually doing that. But that teacher at 19,000 or 39,000 or 59,000 should have been bounced in a day. If they can't spell and they can't put things up on the blackboard.
He would have been bounced if he could have found someone who was willing to work for that salary. I agree, the teacher was awful, but I really think the problem was they couldn't get anybody to teach these kids. 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. I want to move on, talk about the Rumsfeld memo, talk about FEMA, talk about this do-nothing Congress that we can finally say goodbye to. If you want to call in, we want to hear from you. We'll be right back after this.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promised.
Okay, hon.
Sweetheart, smoke outside now. You promised.
What kind of man are you? I'm a father. Look here, my father was a father, and he smoked his brains out in the house.
Watch as he blows those smoke rings on my little red face.
You probably have asthma.
Asthma? Schmasma. I'm telling you, nothing's gonna happen to your kids. I swear.
Don't swear when you're lying. You know very well that thousands of kids get bronchitis, ear infections, and even pneumonia from their parents' cigarette smoke. And didn't you promise your little angels you'd smoke outside?
Hey, Daddy.
Those little devils are just so sweet.
Do the right thing.
Please, smoke outside.
Until you can stop, go out for your kids.
Take the pledge. Call 1-800-513-1157.
It is more than a trial by fire. It is a rite of passage, a challenge to join the elite. And if you succeed, if you can master your fear, outsmart your enemy, and never yield even to yourself, you will be changed forever. The few, the proud, the Marines.
From Washington, back to the Inside Scoop with Mark Levine.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. Still a bunch of topics I want to talk about. See if we can address each one briefly. Let's start with FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association. A study came out, Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, found that fewer than 0.25% of families that were suffering by Hurricane Katrina reached the cap on funding. It discusses that there were computer problems, that people who applied and got funding had to reapply after 3 months, and then less and less people received funding. And it got so bad that U.S. District Judge Richard Leon concluded last week it was a Kafkaesque process with basically them losing applications, giving contradictory information. Let's face it, the reason FEMA is a mess is because your party believes that government shouldn't be used to help people, and so FEMA is proof that government can't help people. Whereas people like, you know, Bill Clinton hired James Lee Witt, who was accomplished at emergency management.
Well, if we proved it, then it's over. Case closed.
We've proved that when Republicans have government, it doesn't work. Yes, I agree with that.
Seriously, Mark. As you know, FEMA doesn't have all the people. FEMA has resources, and FEMA has systems, and FEMA has plans, and FEMA has administrators.
And lousy computers.
But the people who are supposed to deliver all this stuff are not full-time FEMA employees. They're people that are garnered from other places. They're contractors. They're charities. They're state employees. They're all these things.
Hire competent people?
Well, that's a real good question. I'm not going to. I'm not going to defend the.
We shouldn't laugh. I mean, it's really sad, these people in Katrina. But it just seems to me that this is an administration that is going to get ExxonMobil their oil welfare check, but is not really going to care about, again, mostly poor black people in New Orleans.
As we all know, I don't think FEMA's dysfunctionality has to do with lack of resources. In fact, FEMA has been overwhelmed with resources, so many they can't figure out how to shovel it out the door fast enough. FEMA's problem is very much management dysfunction. It's not a desire not to help people. It's not a lack of resources. It's not that the president hasn't asked for and received the resources to help these people. Yeah. It's a dysfunctional agency.
Yeah, and you think when you hire the best Arabian horse judge around, a guy like Michael Brown, you'd get a functional emergency management agency. Well, no wonder they fired James Lee Witt. He only had 30 years experience. Brown didn't have any, but again, he knew those Arabian horses. And we see what happened there.
We finally got around to firing Brownie.
Yes, we did, even though he was doing a heck of a job, according to the president.
Well, for 2 hours he was.
Let me ask you about someone else who was doing such a heck of a job that he got fired, Don Rumsfeld.
Okay. And he was doing a heck of a job.
Was he? Because it's interesting that this guy doing a heck of a job, just days before the election, puts out a memo that we now find out about after the election.
Haven't seen the memo yet, though, have we?
Well, he's confirmed it exists.
Right.
New York Times has given us the essence of the memo,
yes,
and they have confirmed that it's an accurate memo, basically supporting the majority of the Democratic plan. The majority of the Democrats believed in withdrawing troops, lowering troop levels, not setting an exact date, but decreasing levels to make Iraq go on its own. The Democrats proposed this a year ago. Rumsfeld proposed it a day before the election. What's your view on this memo?
Well, first of all, it's not the same as the Democrats because the Democrats have wanted a timetable and exact dates and things like that. In fact, if you go back,
Sanders did. 37 wanted.
And Jack Murtha, when he first started this whole thing, Jack Murtha said he wanted everybody out in 6 months. Now that 6-month deadline was about a year ago.
Yeah, how many lives would have been saved if that had happened?
So the Democrats have been married to timetables, whether or not we've had things going. So obviously, no one is 100% pleased. Things are not going perfectly in Iraq. So you're always looking for other options. You're looking for new ways of doing things, ways to be more effective, see how you can achieve the objectives in a better way, slight variation on the course you're going, et cetera.
And that's a good thing.
What I understand the Secretary of Defense, current Secretary of Defense actually until he's replaced, did was he sent to the President a list of options. We're talking about the drawdown of troops being one of those options, but it also included a lot of other options in there, including the possibility of increasing the troops, including the possibility of enhanced training for the Iraqi forces, et cetera.
I don't think increasing the troops was in
no,
the
it was one of the options that's under consideration by the President.
Look, I'm all for Secretary of Defense giving options to the President. In fact, my extremely low opinion of Don Rumsfeld actually only became very low based on this memo. It actually went up a notch. But what's interesting to me, if John Kerry did something like this, you folks would label him a flip-flopper. What we have is, in effect, a prophet. We have someone, now, some Democrats were against the war from the very beginning. I was one of them, I'm proud to say. We had other people like John Kerry who initially thought it was a good idea and pretty soon after thought it was a bad idea. Now we have the Secretary of Defense, 3.5 years later, or 4 years, it's longer than World War II, whatever the time is. Now he thinks it's a bad idea. 3,000 Americans have died, 20,000 wounded. It seems to me that we should have a president that's willing to be flexible, that's willing to change his mind, and you folks deride that as flip-flopping, but in essence, you flopped so late after the flip that not only is no one complaining, but they're begging the president, please flip-flop already. We want you to get our troops out of Iraq.
Also, as I understand this memo, Mark, it does not it does not draw all of our troops out of Iraq. In fact, it consolidates our troops in Iraq into 5 major bases there.
Redeployment sounds like the Democratic plan.
No, redeployment. A Democratic plan is redeployment to Okinawa, redeployment to.
No, it's not true.
Well,
some of it's within Iraq.
John Murtha wanted redeployment to Okinawa. Ike Skelton, the incoming chairman of the House Defense Committee, Armed Services Committee, wants redeployment to the United States. Now, that's not redeployment.
Have you heard the Mark Levine
That's cutting
plan?
and run.
Did you have the Mark Levine plan?
I probably have, but refresh my memory.
Redeployment to Kurdistan, to an independent Kurdistan in the north, as a way to protect people who've helped our troops, give them a place of refuge. I've always supported an independent Kurdistan. I'm like the only one I know that continues and has always supported that, and they are pro-American, and hey, they got lots of oil.
Well,
too.
you are the only one who supports an independent Kurdistan. You and Joe Biden.
Me and Joe Biden, yes.
At
Joe
one point.
Biden's coming.
In fact, the president had an important meeting today with a very important Shia cleric from Iraq who met with him in the Oval Office, and they had a lengthy discussion. And this particular important cleric who controls a whole bunch of people over there said that he was very much in favor of keeping a unified Iraq, as the Iraqi people have voted for. You can't just negate the votes of 12 million Iraqis.
The votes of 12 million Iraqis. They each voted for their own ethnic minority. The Shiites voted for the Shiites, the Sunnis voted for the Sunnis, the Kurds voted for the Kurds. The majority are Shiites, and now they have death squads with the government involved.
In the parliamentary elections, maybe, but they all voted overwhelmingly for a new constitution which created one unified Iraq.
You know, we provided them a constitution on a yes-no basis.
In
the same way that
they
the
wrote
dictator
their constitution.
of Egypt, Mubarak, they wrote their constitution. We're in there. We've got Bremen. We're like, we'll accept this. We won't accept this. We will accept this. You know, that kind of yes-no vote, the kind that Mubarak has in Egypt every 6 years, that to me is not a meaningful thing. I think the Iraqis, unfortunately, are voting with their feet. 1 million or so have left already. The ones that are staying are killing each other. The government itself is involved in these death squads. Maliki, we are basically supporting Shia death squads. And the only thing about worse or equally as bad as the Shia death squads are the Sunni death squads. This is a country in the throes of a civil war, and I just want to get out, and if they're going to kill each other, not have Americans right in the middle of it.
I don't think that we are supporting any of the death squads. What we are trying to do is...
We are supporting a government that is supporting those death squads.
What we're trying to do is bring peace and security to the Iraqi people. They themselves voted overwhelmingly, 12 million people in one day, to have a unified Iraq, to keep their country together, not to break off into...
They can do whatever they want. I say we get out of there and let them do what they want.
Well, you can't do that. It would be chaos.
It's already chaos.
Even your own party, Mark, even Speaker-to-be Pelosi has indicated now that although she wanted out immediately, now she doesn't want out immediately because she knows it would be disaster.
She never said out immediately. Look, I'm not saying withdraw them tomorrow and have them shooting at our backs, but within calendar year 07, it's about time that we get out. We tell the Iraqis we're going to get out. If they can work it out amongst themselves and have a big gathering together, great. Whether it's one country or separate countries, I agree, that's their decision. But there is chaos now. There is chaos if we leave 5 years from now. There's chaos if we leave 20 years from now. In the meantime, a lot of Americans are going to die.
There will not be chaos in 20 years, and there will not be chaos in 5 years. In fact...
They're going to greet us as liberators?
No,
because I'm still waiting for that. I'm waiting for those roses to appear at our feet.
The time has come for the Iraqis to step up to the plate. The president has had his meeting with the president of Iraq, the prime minister of Iraq, excuse me, Al-Maliki.
That's right.
And I think...
He said, that's not what I told you, Maliki. How's your boy?
And you get that done. I think you will see that there is going to be substantial progress in 07 to the point where we may even be able to pull some troops out in 07.
Really?
We may be able to.
Maybe at the end of the day, they can all get on a ship with a banner, mission accomplished. What do you think?
Well,
maybe then we'll actually have a mission accomplished.
If there is a
maybe all those times the president said we had progress, it'll actually happen just next year. Just next year we'll have progress.
If there is a safe and secure democratic Iraq with the people living in relative safety and the government organizing it, then yes, we should do that.
You know, with a safe and secure democratic Congress, we'll have oversight to make sure they get the right thing done. Folks,
Oy vey, Congress.
I hope you enjoyed the show, and let's just the last few seconds say goodbye to the do-nothingest Congress in American history that meant even less than Truman's. Goodbye, do-nothing Congress. Welcome, Democrats. That's it for the Inside Scoop.